All right, so before the break, we were talking about that sophisticated attack chain that SuperBlack uses. Now let's get to the really interesting part, the possible link to LockBit. You know that name that makes every cybersecurity pro nervous?
Mhm.
So what makes experts suspect a connection here?
Well, there's actually several pieces of evidence that point towards a relationship between SuperBlack and LockBit. For starters, SuperBlack's encryptor, the software that scrambles the victim's data,
Right.
that seems to be based on leaked LockBit 3.0 code.
So it's not like a direct copy and paste. They've made some changes, right?
Yeah, it looks like they took the LockBit code and tweaked it, added their own custom features, kind of like using a blueprint to build something similar, but with their own personal touches.
That's still pretty alarming, though, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It implies they know how LockBit works inside and out.
For sure, and the connections don't stop there. The ransom note that SuperBlack uses, it includes a TOX chat ID,
Okay.
and that ID has been linked to LockBit operations in the past.
TOX chat ID. Now, for those of us who aren't familiar with the dark corners of the internet, can you explain what that is and why it's significant?
Sure, TOX is a secure messaging platform. It's really popular with cybercriminals because it's encrypted and keeps things anonymous.
Makes sense.
Makes it hard to trace them. So finding a TOX ID linked to LockBit inside SuperBlack's ransom note, it's like uncovering a calling card.
Oh, almost like they're intentionally leaving a clue.
It's hard to say what their motive is there. Maybe a way of taunting authorities or trying to throw investigators off.
Or to mislead them.
But whatever the reason, it adds another layer of intrigue to this whole case.
Okay, so we've got the leech code, we've got the TOX ID. What else points to this SuperBlack LockBit connection?
Well, researchers have found overlapping IP addresses
Okay.
used in both SuperBlack attacks and previous LockBit campaigns.
Hold on, IP addresses. Now that sounds pretty technical. Can you break down why this overlap is significant?
Sure, think of an IP address like a digital fingerprint for a device on the internet.
Okay.
When the same IP address shows up in attacks from both LockBit and SuperBlack, it raises a big red flag.
Right.
It suggests they're sharing infrastructure, maybe using the same servers or networks.
It's starting to sound like we have a really strong case here.
And there's one final piece of the puzzle. WipeBlack, remember that digital cleanup crew we talked about?
Yeah.
That's been seen in other ransomware strains that are known to be associated with LockBit.
So they're using the same tools, the same tactics.
Exactly. So then the question becomes, what exactly is the nature of this connection? Is SuperBlack a rogue affiliate of LockBit, or a former member going solo, or maybe like a subcontractor of sorts?
Almost like a whole criminal underworld with different factions and alliances.
It's a very complex ecosystem, and it's hard to say for sure without more investigation, but these connections definitely raise some important questions.
Yeah.
About the evolution of cybercrime. Are we seeing more specialized, interconnected groups popping up? Are the lines between different ransomware gangs starting to blur?
That's a pretty worrying thought, and it makes you wonder if this connection to LockBit is confirmed. What does that tell us about their evolution as a cybercrime group?
Well, LockBit has always been one of the big players in the ransomware world. They're known for those aggressive tactics, large-scale attacks.
Right.
So if SuperBlack is really an offshoot or a close affiliate, it could mean that they're trying to diversify their operations, maybe experimenting with new techniques, targeting new industries, expanding their reach globally.
So they're constantly innovating, adapting to the changing landscape.
Yes, and that's what makes them so dangerous. They're not just sticking to the same old playbook.
Yeah.
They're constantly evolving, finding new ways to exploit things and maximize their profits.
And what does all this mean for organizations who are on the front lines of this cyber battle? What are the implications of this potential LockBit connection?
The implications are huge. If SuperBlack is really linked to LockBit, it could mean we're going to see even more sophisticated and coordinated attacks in the future. LockBit is known for getting into big organizations, stealing tons of data, and crippling critical infrastructure.
So the stakes are getting even higher.
Absolutely. That's why it's more important than ever for organizations to step up their defenses.
Yeah.
We can't afford to be complacent. We need to stay ahead of the curve, anticipate those new threats, and be ready to respond quickly and decisively.
All of this paints a pretty serious picture. But before we get too caught up in a digital doomsday scenario, let's talk solutions. What can organizations do to protect themselves from these evolving ransomware threats, especially with this potential LockBit connection looming?
While the threats are definitely getting more complex, a lot of those basic cybersecurity principles still apply.
Okay.
It's so crucial to make sure that systems are patched regularly, that you have strong passwords, multi-factor authentication,
Hmm.
and that you educate employees about phishing scams and other social engineering tactics.
Those are all great starting points. But are they really enough against these increasingly sophisticated attacks? What else can organizations do to really step up their security game?
You're right. The basic stuff isn't enough anymore. Organizations need to go beyond that. Backing up data regularly is super important because it gives you a safety net if your data gets encrypted or stolen. Investing in more advanced security solutions, things like endpoint detection and response, threat intelligence platforms, those can really help identify and stop threats before they do serious damage.
And I imagine having a good incident response plan in place is pretty important too, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about stopping attacks, but also being ready to respond effectively if one happens. A well-rehearsed incident response plan can really help minimize the damage, contain that breach, and get things back to normal quicker. Think of it like a fire drill. You don't want to wait till the building's on fire to figure out how to evacuate.
That's a great analogy, and it really highlights how important it is to be proactive and think ahead when it comes to cybersecurity.
And it's important to remember that cybersecurity isn't just the IT team's responsibility.
Yeah?
It's everyone's responsibility.
Right.
From the CEO to the newest intern, everybody plays a part in protecting the organization's data and systems.
So building that culture of security awareness is key.
Exactly. And that means regular security training for everyone, promoting good cyber hygiene, and encouraging that see something, say something mentality.
Well, we've covered a lot today, from the technical details of SuperBlack to the bigger picture of the potential LockBit connection. We talked about the need for a multi-layered approach to security, the importance of working together and sharing information, and of course, having that incident response plan ready to go.
Hmm.
I think it's safe to say that the world of cybercrime is constantly changing, becoming more complex and connected. But before we wrap up, I'd like to get your final thoughts on the SuperBlack case and what our listeners should take away from this deep dive. It feels like we've uncovered a whole web of connections here with this SuperBlack case. What's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember as they're navigating this increasingly dangerous threat landscape?
If there's one thing I want to really drive home, it's that you can't underestimate the threat. Ransomware is a huge problem and it's constantly evolving. It's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
The days of just relying on your antivirus software are long gone. We're up against some really sophisticated adversaries who are always coming up with new tricks and changing their tactics.
That's definitely a sobering thought. But knowledge is power, right? The more we understand about these threats, the better equipped we are to defend against them.
Absolutely, and that's exactly why deep dives like this are so important.
Yeah.
By looking at specific cases like SuperBlack, we can get valuable insights into how these attackers work, what they're after, and what steps we can take to protect ourselves. Staying informed is really half the battle.
So what are some practical steps that our listeners can take to really fortify their defenses and stay one step ahead? We talked about the basics like strong passwords and patching, but what about those who are already doing all that? What's the next level of protection?
Thinking back to those Fortinet vulnerabilities that SuperBlack exploited, it just reminds us that no system is perfect, no system is 100% secure. Even with the best security in place, there's always a chance that a really determined attacker could find a way in.
So it's not just about building walls, it's also about having a plan for when those walls inevitably get breached.
Exactly. Think of it like a medieval castle. You might have high walls and a moat, but you also need guards on the watchtowers, weapons in the armory, and a plan for what to do when the invaders get in.
Right.
And in the digital world, that means having a multi-layered approach to security.
Can you give us some examples of what those additional layers might look like?
Sure. Beyond the basics, organizations should really consider things like intrusion detection and prevention systems, endpoint detection and response, security information and event management, that kind of thing.
Okay.
These tools can help you monitor your network activity, spot suspicious behavior, and alert security teams to potential problems in real time.
So it's all about having eyes and ears everywhere, constantly on the lookout for any signs of trouble.
That's a great way to put it, and just as important as having the right tools is knowing how to actually use them properly. Investing in security awareness training for employees is absolutely crucial. Teach them how to recognize those phishing emails, those social engineering tricks, and other common attack methods. Empower them to be that first line of defense.
So creating a human firewall. a network of users who are aware of the threats and know how to respond.
Exactly. And finally, I can't stress enough how important it is to have a solid incident response plan.
Yeah.
This should outline exactly what to do if there's a breach, who to contact, how to contain the damage, how to recover your data.
So it's like having a fire escape plan for your digital assets.
That's a great analogy. And just like a fire escape plan, your incident response plan needs to be tested regularly, updated as needed to make sure it's effective and up to date.
This has been such a fascinating and eye-opening look into SuperBlack and the world of ransomware. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the technical details to the bigger picture, thinking about that possible LockBit connection. As we wrap up, any final words of wisdom for our listeners who are out there on the front lines of this digital battle?
Just stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay proactive. Cybersecurity is a marathon, not a sprint. There's always something new, to learn a new threat, to watch out for a new challenge to overcome. By being curious, by continuing to learn and adapt our strategies, we can navigate this complex landscape and come out stronger and more resilient.
Well said. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and practical steps to bolster your defenses. Remember, knowledge is power, and by staying informed and engaged, we can all work together to raise the bar against these cyber threats. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious out there in the digital world.